Using stamps of any kind is a great way of adding interest and different textures to your pottery to make it more unique and your own. You can use stamps to create texture on all sides of your pieces. You can use thin roller stamps to create interesting lines. You can use single stamps and repeat them together to create a new design around a specific spot. You can also use one-off stamps to just add a little bit of interest. What we want to remember about using stamps or stamping on clay is that a stamp doesn't have to be necessarily something that looks like a stamp, right? So these things over here, this is made out of clay and bisque fired, and they are made specifically to be a stamp. However, all these things over here, the fork, the seashell, all these things are things that can still be pressed into clay to create a texture or a stamp. So all of these things you see here are stamps. The clay that you'll need needs to be plastic or leather hard, or somewhere in between. If it's a hard leather hard, it's gonna be harder to press the stamp into the clay to create an impression. And of course, bone dry, you're not gonna be able to press anything into that clay. It's already dried out. Let's take this fork. There's a couple things you can do with it. You can, just press into it to create a pattern or a texture. You can drag it. You can do different lines. You can even use the back side and create a pattern that way. Something to be careful about is when you're pressing something into the clay, there's a sweet spot in between not pressing enough and pressing too hard. So if I press too hard, the clay, of course, will become much thinner in those spots and the clay will warp. Or if you press not hard enough, you won't really see much of that texture. As always, I encourage you to play with this technique before going on to your final product, whatever that is. So I'm going to show you a couple different bisque fired stamps. So this, 3 simple lines, but there are a lot of different variations you can do with this. You can also combine stamps to create a whole different design. The roller stamps have become one of my favorite things to play with. It creates an interesting line, which you could use just as one single line. Or if you want to combine them to create a different texture, you could even put them side by side. When you want to make something out of slab that has texture, I recommend starting first by doing the texture first on the flat slab and then cutting out the template. Check out what happens when I cut out my clay first and then stamp it. You see that the clay gets pushed around and it no longer is that perfect square. The last type of stamp I want to show you is these wider texture rollers. Place a stamp on one side and simply roll. You can absolutely still put stamps into a piece that's already made, but just be prepared that it may get a little bit wonky, like around the rim right here. And when you are applying the stamp, make sure you have a hand or something on the inside so that the clay is supported. Here are some more examples of how you can use different stamps together to create a new design. I hope you have fun playing with stamps.